ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thanks very much. Just before I begin, unfortunately, a couple of our premiers have to head to the airport in about 10 minutes, Premiers Horgan and Savikata. So after my opening statement, I would suggest if you have questions for them, you direct them so they can get out of here and get to their flights on time. I want to thank my colleagues from across Western and Northern Canada for joining us here in Edmonton today and last night for an important discussion about how we can be partners in prosperity, working together for jobs, economic growth, and environmentally responsible development across Western and Northern Canada. We are partners in so many ways in our economies, our geographies, in the social and environmental challenges that we face. And we had very constructive conversations over the past 24 hours on issues that matter to the daily lives of Western and Northern Canadians. As I say, the main focus was on economic opportunity, but we also discussed important environmental challenges and social challenges such as addictions and mental health. I was very pleased to see a consensus to work together on the idea of economic corridors across Canada, both from east to west and north to south, to help us to move energy, electricity, natural gas, and other products. This includes infrastructure like highways, rail, pipelines, and other forms of infrastructure that can help us as a country to share in prosperity. There was also a strong commitment to reduce barriers to internal trade. Some of the strongest language I've seen in one of these communiques that we'll be taking to the Council of the Federation to be chaired by Premier Moe in Saskatoon in a couple of weeks. And in this respect, I was very happy to see, I think, a groundbreaking commitment to pursue mutual recognition of professional credentials. This is hugely important. I think we agreed it makes no sense that a nurse or a doctor from BC shouldn't be able to have that certification recognized in Alberta or vice versa across our jurisdictions. It's a lot of work to do in that, but it's an important start. We'll be taking that again to the Premier's meeting in July in Saskatoon. There was also a clear call for the federal government to respect provincial jurisdiction in our own areas, and that includes where we have exclusive authority over resource development, but also in areas like healthcare, for example, to ensure that we have the flexibility to deliver services appropriately to our citizens. So on the whole, I thought it was a full, ambitious agenda. We got a lot achieved, and I want to thank my colleagues for their presence. I will be making comments in French towards the end, but acknowledging that Premiers Horgan and Savikata have to leave shortly, I will open the floor.
Laurence Martin, Radio-Canada. My first question is for you, Premier Horgan. Premier Kenney just mentioned that you had discussions on economic corridors to move energy. Does it mean that you've made concessions on Trans Mountain?
There you go. No, it means that the federal government last week made a decision which was within their jurisdiction to proceed with the Trans Mountain pipeline. That doesn't change my views on the issue. It doesn't change the role of the province of British Columbia. We have been and will continue to issue permits as they're requested by the proponent, and will continue to assert our jurisdiction and hold the federal government accountable. From the beginning, this issue has not been about, in my opinion, has not been about British Columbia and Alberta. I've been steadfast on that for the past 2 years. It's been about the federal government asserting jurisdiction in an area that I believe is at a minimum shared, if not in some instances exclusively provincial. So those are issues that we disagree on, but that doesn't mean we can't have a robust discussion about the issues that Premier Kenney discussed in his opening remarks. We need to bind together Western Canada, in fact all of Canada, to meet realize our full economic potential, not as provinces, but for the people of Canada.
Just one rebuttal for you, Premier Kenney. Pourquoi est-ce que vous n'avez pas condamné la loi québécoise sur la laïcité?
Je l'ai fait dans l'Assemblée nationale, excusez-moi, la législature de l'Alberta la semaine dernière, mais vous parlez d'aujourd'hui, ce n'était pas sur l'agenda.
OK. Mais pourquoi
Thank you.
Can I follow up, please? Kim Trinacity, CBC Edmonton. Premier Kenney, I'm just wondering if you could respond to what Premier Horgan just said. A couple of days ago, or maybe yesterday, you indicated that you were seeking something from Premier Horgan, which in my estimation was back off any opposition to TMX. So I'm wondering what you think of what Premier Horgan has said today.
Well, Premier Horgan and I had a good conversation both last night, and the issue of Trans Mountain came up again, of course, in today's meetings. I think we understand each other's positions very clearly. Our position is that the federal government has exclusive jurisdiction to regulate interprovincial infrastructure like pipelines, and it's approved the Trans Mountain expansion now for the second time. That's been approved multiple times by the courts. We have a majority of Canadians and dozens of First Nations who want to get this done. I think it's good for the whole country. It adds to our national prosperity. It represents a potential of tens of billions of dollars of revenues for governments to pay for health care and education. It also will help to get full value for one of our country's most important resources. And so I indicated to Premier Horgan our hope that the government of British Columbia will respect the decisions that have been made. And so I think that the Premier has a full understanding of our position.
And just to follow up, will that cause either of you, Premiers Horgan or Kenney, to, I guess, rescind any kind of legal action that is being pursued currently through the courts? Thank you.
The only legal action that we have embarked upon is a reference case that went through our appeal court just recently and was overruled or found to be ultra vires unconstitutional. So we're taking the issue to the Supreme Court of Canada, where there is a different set of judges with a different set of perspectives on the national imperative. This is not unusual in Canada. We are a collection of governments that sometimes work cooperatively, sometimes disagree on issues of substance. On the question of the jurisdiction to approve the project, I've said privately to Premier Kenney and publicly to British Columbians that the federal government has the right to make the decision that they made. Having said that, I have a responsibility to make sure that I'm defending the things that matter to British Columbians. I said that during the election campaign. I've said that every day since. I have no quarrel with the people of Alberta. I have no quarrel with people in other parts of Canada. But I have a responsibility to protect and defend the things that matter to British Columbians. The federal government has responsibility for the marine protection, the ocean protections plan. I've made it clear to Prime Minister Trudeau that I believe it's inadequate, and I will be taking that up with him. Again, not an issue for the people of Alberta, not an issue for the Premier of Alberta, except for the coast is also part and parcel of the Canada that he lives in, as with Premier Moe, Premier Pallister, and the territorial premiers as well. I believe that British Columbians expect me to defend their interests. We'll continue with the reference case. I had suggested to former Premier Notley, as well as Prime Minister Trudeau, a year ago that we should go directly to the Supreme Court, and it would be over now. But they refused to join me in that case, so we've had to go through the appeal court.
Actually, I agreed with Premier Horgan on that too. So we
could have done this a year ago.
Premiers, it is now 4:15 for those of you who have to leave.
Can I ask Premier Horgan a quick question?
Local
Richard Zussman,
boy.
Global BC. In terms of the personal relationship between the two of you, a lot was made about both Premier Kenney and Premier Horgan meeting. How important was it being face-to-face in terms of building a rapport between the two of you?
I wore a blue suit so I could blend in. No, I mean, Premier Kenney and I spoke on the telephone. I congratulated him on his victory. We met last night. We had a robust discussion about the issues that are important to all of the clicking cameras and others assembled here. We had a good discussion as colleagues. Premier Moe has been pretty clear on his support for TMX as well, but that doesn't impair our ability to work together on ensuring that Saskatchewan canola gets to markets or ensuring that pork from Manitoba gets to markets. We have worked, I believe, very cooperatively as a group, and I think Premier Kenney and I are off on the right foot.
And I would just add, I think we understand each other's positions very clearly. I made it clear to Premier Horgan that if we see from any province obstruction of the movement of our products from this province in a way that we think violates the Constitution, we will take action to defend our vital economic interests. I hope it doesn't come to that, and I believe we've begun a productive, professional, and respectful relationship so we can discuss these issues and with a clear understanding of our mutual goals.
Richard, do you have a follow-up?
I do. I'll get hell when I go back to Victoria if he's late for his flight. But quickly, there is another court case going on, and that's challenging the turn off the taps legislation. It's being heard tomorrow in Calgary. What's the expectation in terms from you of how important it is for BC to win that case?
I'm hopeful that we're successful, but again, I don't believe that, I had a conversation with Premier Kenney upon his election and the bringing into force Bill 12, and he made it clear to me that it wasn't his intention to use it unless he believed he had to, and I think he just said it again. I don't believe he has to. I believe that we have issued more permits than Alberta, only because we've been asked to issue more permits, but we have not been dragging our feet on this. The rule of law is paramount in Canada, and that's why we've been proceeding through the courts, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully. But on the jurisdictional question that, the reference question that is now, while we've sought leave to take to the Supreme Court, I believe that's a fundamental question for British Columbians, regardless of the state of play on the pipeline.
I think it says a lot about the quality of leadership in both of these two provinces beside me, that I came here with considerable referee experience in my life and didn't have to use any of it. Both these gentlemen and all the premiers at this table are deeply committed to this country and demonstrated it in the candor and the very effective discussions that we shared throughout the last number of hours together.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
Now, John, I know you have to run, and just don't write the story that he stormed off. He has to go catch a flight, right? So,
I'll walk slowly if that helps. Cheers.
See you soon, John.
See you in a couple of weeks. See you, Bob.
Yeah. Yeah,
Go
g'day,
ahead,
Premier.
Emma.
I'll put this one to you, Premier Kenney, since Hogan's storming out of the room. Did LNG come up at all, and was there any discussion about perhaps cooperation there to deal with that issue?
yes, absolutely. We, Premier Horgan and I discussed that last night in our private meeting, and we did collectively today about the great opportunities of liquefied natural gas. Premier Horgan's government has clearly expressed its support for that as a major job creator in BC, and it's a great chance for us to get full value for our natural gas. LNG Canada, which is a $40 billion capital investment to be supplied by the Coastal Link gas pipeline, will primarily draw its feedstock from northeastern BC, but not from Alberta. We'd love to see it, a second major LNG project of a similar scale, and we'll do everything we can to facilitate that. And I believe Premier Horgan stands ready to support that, as well as some of the smaller bids like wood fiber that wants to build a LNG export facility at Squamish. So I think that's an area where we can and where we have found common ground that would be beneficial to both provinces.
And just to follow up, and I'll throw this open to the floor, is there anything that you desperately wanted to discuss and get off your chest that you didn't get a chance to? You can tell us now. We're therapists.
The dreaded open-ended question.
You're so welcome. I know, like Premier Pallister, for example, you wanted to put forward a movement here about kind of the Quebec law about religious symbols, for example. Did you get a chance to chat about that?
Yeah, we had good discussion yesterday on that topic, and Manitoba remains very concerned about anything that interferes with our ability to celebrate as a country the diversity that's a reality here. I'm a farm boy and I don't like erosion, and I certainly am always concerned about the erosion of rights in our country. So I'll continue to have that view and I'll continue to express it.
Hi, Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News. Premier Pallister, on the subject of Bill 21, François Legault has reacted to your comments, and he says, will Mr. Pallister say that Germans are racist, the French are racist, that in Belgium they are racist? Come on, it doesn't make sense. I think it's good politics to win some votes. What would you say in response to that?
Well, I've never used the word racist. I've expressed my concerns, and I believe they're the concerns of many Canadians, that we demonstrate respect and tolerance. We have Canada Day coming up. We won't be celebrating our sameness there. We'll be celebrating our diversity, and that is as this country should do, and as it has done, and as I hope and pray it continues to do.
Okay, and I guess my second question is for Premier Kenney. We haven't seen the joint statement yet. There was some drama last year. Not everyone signed on. Alberta didn't sign it. Is everyone going to sign it this year? When will we see it?
Yes, we have a unanimous communique that you should be receiving momentarily. We were just waiting for some final edits. We spent a lot of time working together on a statement that finds common ground. It frankly meant that we didn't all get what we would like. You know, Premier Horgan wasn't going to agree to endorse the TMX expansion, for example, but
He's not here now.
but so obviously, you know, there are some differences, but it's a good document, and I want to underscore in the communique an issue that some of you might gloss over because it's not a kind of bright, shiny issue, but that is a commitment to work on mutual recognition of occupational certification. I know that's not a headline, but it is hugely important to facilitate the movement of people across this country without unnecessary barriers. I want to acknowledge and give a shout out to Brian for his leadership in advancing internal trade within Canada. The barriers to trade and mobility of people is costing us dearly. It's making us poorer. It is ridiculous, as Brian often points out, that it's easier to move as a professional or to move goods within the 28 sovereign member states of the European Union than between the 13 jurisdictions of this federation. So as we celebrate Canada Day on Monday, let's recommit ourselves to being an economic union. And this moves us, this is an important statement that Scott's going to take to Saskatoon, to the Council of the Federation, to say, let's work on mutual recognition of occupational certification. What does that mean? It means a nurse that moves from Ontario to Saskatchewan should be able to practice as a nurse in principle. A lot of technical things to work out, but that's an important goal.
It's James Keller with the Globe and Mail. Premier Kenney, to Enbridge's Line 5, I'm not sure if you've had time to follow the developments today. It looks like Michigan and Enbridge have reached a bit of an impasse, which could lead to Line 5 being shut down imminently. How concerned are you about that, and is Alberta taking any steps to get involved in that process?
Sorry, I haven't been briefed on today's developments. I've been in these meetings all day. I'll certainly take a look at that and respond as quickly as possible, but we would obviously be concerned about any impairment of that project. It's an important way that we export energy to the United States, and done in an environmentally safe way. You know, this line has been targeted by the same foreign-funded special interests that have been trying to landlock Canadian energy. These are the same groups that have been targeting the Line 3 replacement, Keystone XL, that helped to get Northern Gateway and Energy East killed, that are targeting Trans Mountain, the same groups that were behind C-69 and C-48, the same groups that have said nothing to stop a doubling of oil production in the United States in the past decade, and that do precisely nothing to stop dictator oil from some of the world's worst regimes from dominating global energy markets. But this is yet another example of their political and legal campaign from funded by foreign sources to inhibit the country that produces energy at the highest human rights, labor, and environmental standards on Earth. We won't tolerate this any longer, and that's why our government is setting up a war room to push back against groups like that.
And just a quick follow-up back to TMX. We heard some discussion about respecting the federal jurisdiction. BC is still mulling, joining Tsleil-Waututh legal challenge of the new approval. Does that sound like respecting the federal government's jurisdiction when we still got a premier talking about joining legal challenges to specifically block it?
Well, I can't speak for Premier Horgan, but I did hear him just say 5 minutes ago that he respects the federal constitutional jurisdiction over interprovincial pipelines, and he also believes in the rule of law. And I have to say I agree on both fronts. I frankly think that the legal strategy of British Columbia is futile. The 5-0 decision at the BC Appeal Court on their most recent case, I think, was overwhelming. It was decisive. It's time to move on. It's time to build the pipeline. As I underscored to Premier Horgan, recent polling indicates that nearly 2/3 of British Columbians support the construction of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. So it's by a margin of 2-1. You see public support in BC. That includes support in the Lower Mainland and in the Greater Vancouver region. We've had this debate for 5 years now, and I think as people have learned more, they've seen that we have a strong safety record, tight environmental regulations. Let's move forward in prosperity.
I want to build on Premier Kenney's comment, if I could quickly, and just say that you'll see in the communique as well unanimous commitment among all premiers to increase involvement in terms of the opportunities that come from these types of projects for Indigenous Canadians. And that is critical, not just in the consultation stage and the run-up to building something new, but in terms of the wealth creation opportunities, the job creation, the strengthening of those communities on an ongoing basis. This is a critical piece of how we need to move forward as a country. not exclusively in Western Canada either, but across the
100%.
country.
I should have mentioned that. Last night, we had a dinner. Unfortunately, John wasn't yet in town, but about 80% of our unstructured conversation ended up being about how to ensure that Indigenous people are partners in prosperity, including with an ownership and equity stake in major projects. And we actually wrote that, we added basically a whole new agenda item and wrote that into our communique. This reflects our government's commitment through the Indigenous Opportunities Corporation. I think all of us were very excited. We compared notes to see a growing number of Indigenous communities moving to support for responsible resource development.
Marie-Pierre Mercier, Radio-Canada. Monsieur Kenney, pourquoi, si vous êtes tous contre la loi sur la laïcité, vous n'avez pas signé quelque chose par rapport à ça, que vous étiez contre?
Ce n'était pas sur l'agenda. On a développé l'agenda du réunion pendant plusieurs mois. Et l'agenda était, l'accent était sur les questions économiques. Vous pouvez poser les questions à chaque premier ministre de leur point de vue à cet égard. Je me suis exprimé ma position dans l'Assemblée de l'Alberta la semaine dernière, comme j'ai fait en tant que ministre du multiculturalisme au fédéral, mais nous sommes axés sur les questions économiques dans l'entretien aujourd'hui.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous répéter en français les accords sur lesquels vous êtes, vous avez conclu finalement?
Excusez-moi?
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous dire en français ce que vous avez dit au
Oh oui,
début?
certainement. So she wants, I've been asked to just give a little summary of the opening statement, if it's okay in French. And, pour dire qu'on a eu les discussions très fructueuses aujourd'hui. J'aimerais remercier tous les premiers ministres des territoires provinces du Nord et de l'Ouest pour les discussions axées sur la croissance économique, la création des emplois et le développement des ressources de façon responsable. On a également s'adressé aux questions environnementales importantes et les questions sociales comme par exemple la santé mentale et les addictions. On a développé un consensus en faveur des corridors économiques de l'Est à l'Ouest et du Sud au Nord du Canada pour envoyer les ressources, l'énergie, l'électricité et les autres produits comme partenaires en prospérité. On a renforcé notre engagement pour commerce libre à l'intérieur du Canada et particulièrement une reconnaissance des titres professionnels entre toutes les provinces. Ça veut dire une réciprocité dans la reconnaissance de certifications occupationnelles. Enfin, on a souligné notre engagement de protéger la juridiction des provinces et territoires par rapport à l'ingérence du fédéral.
This will be the last question. Go ahead.
Hi, Kevin Mayman with Star Edmonton. In your opening remarks, Premier Kenney, you mentioned forest fires and permafrost. I'm wondering if climate change was discussed at all today.
Yes, it certainly was, and you'll see that reflected in the communique.
Anything in particular? Were you talking strategies?
Yes, and one of the strategies that we agreed upon that had been suggested by Premier Moe was to develop an inventory of all of the concrete actions that our governments and major industry players are taking to reduce carbon and greenhouse gas emissions. We had a very, I think, an hour-long conversation on that. We did disagree amongst ourselves about carbon taxes. At least three of us are engaged in defending our taxpayers from the federal imposition. Other territories and provinces have different views on that. But we were all agreed on the need for concrete action to combat climate change by reducing emissions and in ways that help the world, because we all recognize that this is not just, this is not just a Canadian issue, it's a global issue, and that we should also be getting greater credit for the things we do to share our technology with the developing world to reduce their carbon intensity. Premier McLeod?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. We had a very good opportunity to discuss not only climate change, but the changing geopolitical situation in the Arctic. Both of my colleagues from Yukon and Nunavut, we've had a lot of discussion. The North and the Arctic has been most affected by climate change, and we feel that it's very important for us to educate Southerners like yourself and the rest of the people here that they have to take it more seriously. You have to take actions that we're only a small population, so we're not causing the problem, and we need to find a way to deal with it. You know, we have our roads are changing, the way we build roads, the way we build buildings, our wildlife is being affected, and we also see an opportunity whereby with the changing Arctic, the importance of the Arctic is becoming more and more. We see opportunities for transportation and air corridors, and we think there's a tremendous opportunity for us to work together. All of us work with the Canadian government, and you see that what's happening in Russia, you see what's happening in China. China's got an Arctic policy, they're building icebreakers, and those are the kinds of things that we want to talk about, and it's a very important issue, and you'll be hearing a lot more about that. Thank you.
Our discussion on climate change, just further to what Bob has said, went far beyond the mitigation throughout Canada's Arctic and the nation of Canada, as well as Premier Kenney had indicated. We had a discussion about how can we share some of what we have done in our different jurisdictions with one another and create a platform for premiers and provinces to do that across the nation. We talked about the agriculture industry in Saskatchewan, the mining industry across the north and across the nation, the emissions reductions that are occurring here in Alberta in the oil sands industry. We have zero emissions wellhead sites operating in Saskatchewan, a 45% methane reduction plan that is well in action. And can we share those real happenings in our industries, those positive occurrences in our industries with one another, so that we can share them likewise with Canadians and ensure that Canadians have the facts of what steps the industry is taking, real steps, real action on climate change, if you will, so that Canadians can be proud of the industries that we have here. And this led very quickly into a discussion about how do we provide these sustainable products that we have in Canada, in many cases among the most sustainable products in the world. How do we provide those to other Canadians through economic corridors, the conversation of hydroelectric power, of oil, of LNG being provided through these economic corridors, the opportunity for mine goods to travel on rail through an economic corridor so that these sustainable products can be accessible to other Canadians, and ultimately connect with our ports here in the nation so that the rest of the world can have access to some of the most sustainable natural resource products in the world.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Cheers, thank you.
Thank you. Way to go.
Thank you, sir. Good job.